Welcome to Ink and Evidence, where silence tells stories, and every clue brings us closer to the truth. From chilling crime cases to unsolved mysteries and secrets the world tried to forget, we uncover what lies beneath. If you dare to question, if you seek the truth, then you're exactly where you need to be. Tell us where you're watching this video from. Your feedback always inspires us. Stay tuned to solve the mystery, because the truth always leaves a trace.
Chapter 1. The Question at Dusk. Have you ever heard a question so softly spoken that it seemed less like a sound and more like a shadow entering the room? That was how it began at Blackthorn House, on the last evening of November, when the snow had already covered the long carriage road and the sky was fading into the color of cold ash. The house stood at the edge of the moor, old and square-shouldered, with tall windows glowing amber through the dusk. Inside, the fires had been lit early. Logs settled with gentle cracks in the hearths, clocks murmured in distant corridors, and the smell of beeswax, old books, and spiced tea rested in the air like a memory. In the drawing room, 7 people had gathered before dinner. No one seemed uneasy. Not at first. Mrs. Elspeth Vale, the mistress of the house, sat near the fire with a wool shawl around her shoulders, her silver hair arranged with careful dignity. Beside her stood her nephew, Adrian Vale, a handsome young man with restless eyes and fingers that tapped silently against his glass. Across from them, Miss Clara Wynne, the governess, held a book open in her lap, though she had not turned a page for nearly 10 minutes. There was also Reverend Pike, who smelled faintly of cold air and pipe tobacco, Mr. Larkin, the family solicitor, precise and pale, and Mrs. Vale's companion, Miss Marrow, who knitted without looking down, as if her hands remembered what her mind wished to forget. The 7th guest sat apart from the others. He had arrived only an hour before sunset. A stranger. He called himself Mr. Elias Gray. His coat was travel-worn, his gloves damp from snow, and a dark scarf covered the lower part of his face when the butler first admitted him. He claimed he had lost his way on the road from Brindleford and asked only for shelter until morning. Mrs. Vale, who believed hospitality to be a duty older than suspicion, had allowed him in. Now he sat near the window, where the last light of day touched his profile and made it difficult to study him. He was neither young nor old, neither large nor slight. His voice, when he thanked his hostess, had been calm, educated, and curiously forgettable. And yet, from the moment he entered, something in the room changed. Not visibly. No vase trembled, no candle guttered, no one gasped. But conversations became shorter. Smiles remained a little too long. Every person, without admitting it, had begun to listen for him. Outside, the wind pressed snow against the windows with a soft, dry whisper. Mrs. Vale lifted her teacup. "Mr. Gray," she said pleasantly, "you must forgive our quietness. Blackthorn is not a lively house in winter." The stranger inclined his head. "Quiet houses," he replied, "often preserve the clearest echoes." No one answered at once. Adrian gave a small laugh, but it sounded thin. "An odd thing to say, sir." "Perhaps," said Mr. Gray, "I have a fondness for odd things." Miss Clara looked up then. Her eyes moved briefly to the stranger's hands. He wore gloves still, though the room was warm. The clock in the hall struck 6. Each chime moved through the house slowly, as though descending a staircase. Mrs. Vale set down her cup. "We dine at 7, she said. "Until then, perhaps Reverend Pike will tell us whether the village road is passable." The Reverend cleared his throat and began speaking of snowdrifts, fallen branches, and the likelihood of being trapped until morning. His words were ordinary, but beneath them ran another current. The stranger's presence had become a silent question placed among them. Who was he? Why had he come here? And why, when he looked at the portraits above the mantel, did his gaze linger on only one? The portrait showed a young woman in a blue velvet dress. Her face was pale and graceful, her dark eyes full of some private sadness. Beneath the frame, a brass plate read, "Isabel Vale, 1898–1921. Mr. Gray looked at it for only a moment too long. But Miss Marrow noticed. So did Mr. Larkin. And so, most importantly, did Mrs. Vale. Her hand tightened around the arm of her chair. "You admire my daughter's portrait?" she asked. The room grew still. The stranger turned from the painting. "She has a memorable face." "Had," Mrs. Vale said softly. "She died 30 years ago." "Yes," said Mr. Gray. "One word. Too certain. Too quiet." Adrian stopped tapping his glass. The fire gave a low sigh as a log collapsed inward. Mr. Larkin leaned forward. "You speak as though you knew of the family." "A traveler hears things." "Not on that road," said the solicitor. "Not in this weather." A faint smile touched the stranger's eyes, though not his mouth. "No," he said, "perhaps not." Mrs. Vale had gone very still. In the firelight, her face seemed carved from ivory. "What is it you want, Mr. Gray?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he removed one glove with slow care and placed it on the table beside him. His hand was lean, with a small scar running across the knuckles. Miss Clara noticed Adrian look away. Only for a second. But sometimes a second is a confession. The stranger folded his hands. "At dusk," he said, "questions are easier to ask. The day is not there to shame us, and the night has not yet taught us to lie." No one moved. Then he asked it. "Who among you locked Isabel Vale in the East Tower on the night she died?" The silence that followed did not fall. It rose. It rose from the carpet, from the old chairs, from the portraits, from the darkening corners of the room. It rose until even the ticking clock seemed afraid to continue. Mrs. Vale's lips parted, but no sound came. Reverend Pike lowered his eyes. Mr. Larkin's face lost all expression. Miss Marrow's knitting needles stopped in midair. Adrian laughed again, suddenly sharply. "What nonsense is this?" Mr. Gray turned to him. "Is it nonsense? My aunt's daughter died of fever." "So the village was told." "So everyone was told," Adrian snapped. "Everyone," said the stranger, "except the dead." A coal cracked in the grate. Miss Clara closed her book at last. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why would you ask such a thing here?" "Because," Mr. Gray said, "this is the room where the lie began." Mrs. Vale stood abruptly. Her teacup slipped from its saucer and broke on the floor, scattering porcelain like small white bones. "That is enough." But the stranger's eyes remained calm. "Madam, I have no wish to distress you. You have done nothing else since entering my house. Then forgive me for continuing." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small object wrapped in faded blue silk. "This was found last spring when the East Tower roof was repaired." He placed it on the table. No one touched it. Slowly, the silk fell open. Inside lay a tarnished silver locket. Mrs. Vale made a sound as soft as breath leaving a candle. Miss Marrow whispered, "Isabel S." Adrian stared at it as though it were alive. Mr. Gray looked around the room, and now there was something unmistakably deliberate in his gaze. Not anger, not triumph, patience. The patience of a man who had waited many years to ask one question. "The locket was found beneath a loose stone," he said. "Inside it was a folded scrap of paper. The ink was badly faded, but one line remained." He paused. Outside, the snow tapped at the glass. "The stranger is not a stranger." At that, Reverend Pike closed his eyes. Mr. Larkin rose halfway from his chair, then sat again. Mrs. Vale seemed suddenly older, smaller, as if the past had entered the room and placed its hand upon her shoulder. Adrian spoke first. "This is a cruel performance." "No," said Mr. Gray. "A performance is what happened 30 years ago, mourning clothes, a closed coffin, a doctor paid to write fever, a daughter buried before anyone asked why there were bruises on the tower door." Mrs. Vale whispered, "Who are you?" The stranger looked at her then, and for the first time his composure trembled. "Only slightly, but enough. My name is not Elias Gray." The wind moved under the eaves with a low, mournful note. He untied the scarf at his throat, opened his collar, and revealed a small birthmark just beneath his left jaw, shaped almost like a crescent moon. Miss Marrow dropped her knitting. Mrs. Vale took one step back. "No," she breathed. Mr. Gray's voice softened. "Isabel had a son." The room seemed to tilt around the words. "She gave birth in secret," he continued. "She sent the child away before she died, away from this house, away from the family that had already decided her love was a disgrace." Mrs. Vale lifted a trembling hand to her mouth. Adrian's face had gone bloodless. "And now," the stranger said, "I have come only to learn whether my mother died alone." No one spoke. Then from the far corner, Miss Clara Wynne rose. She had been a child when Isabel died, a servant's daughter allowed to sleep beneath the stairs. No one had remembered that. No one had thought she could know anything. But she did. "I heard her," Clara said. All eyes turned to her. Her voice trembled but did not break. "I heard Miss Isabel knocking from inside the tower. She was crying. She kept saying, 'Please, I will go in the morning. I promise I will go.'" Mrs. Vale covered her face. Clara looked at Adrian. "And I heard a man answer her." Adrian stepped back. "I was 5 years old," Clara whispered, "but I remember his voice because he laughed." The stranger did not move. The firelight shone over the locket, over the broken cup, over every face trapped between memory and truth. Mrs. Vale sank into her chair. "It was my brother," she said. "Adrian's father. He locked her there to frighten her only for one night, that was what he said. By morning she was burning with fever, and by evening she was gone." Adrian shook his head. "My father protected this family." "No," said the stranger gently. "He protected its name." The words settled quietly. Not like accusation. Like snow. Beyond the windows, night had fully arrived. The road was hidden. The world outside had disappeared. But inside Blackthorn House, something long buried had finally been brought into the light. Mrs. Vale reached for the locket with shaking fingers. "What do you want from us?" she asked. The stranger looked at the portrait above the mantel. For a moment, he seemed less like an intruder than a child, standing at the door of a room he had never been allowed to enter. "I wanted the truth," he said, "and perhaps before morning to sit once in the house where my mother lived." No one refused him. The clock resumed its ticking. Softly, carefully, as though time itself had been listening. Chapter 2. The House That Watches. Blackthorn House did not merely stand upon the moor. It observed. By daylight, it appeared respectable enough, with its gray stone walls, steep slate roof, and tall chimneys breathing pale smoke into the winter air. But after dusk, when snow gathered on the window ledges and the lamps were lit one by one behind the glass, the house seemed to wake with a patient, silent intelligence. It watched from its upper windows. It watched from the dark mirror above the hall table. It watched from the portraits whose painted eyes followed guests along the corridors, not with curiosity, but with remembrance. Mr. Elias Gray noticed this before anyone told him. He had arrived near evening, with snow on his shoulders and a tired courtesy in his manner, claiming he had lost the road to Brindleford. Mrs. Elspeth Vale had permitted him shelter, because no civilized person turned a traveler into a storm. Yet as the butler led him through the entrance hall, Mr. Gray paused beneath the great staircase and looked upward. There, half hidden in shadow, hung a narrow portrait of Blackthorn House itself, painted many years before, when ivy still climbed its walls and summer roses grew by the door. "How strange," Mr. Gray murmured. The butler Haynes glanced back. "Sir." The painter gave the house windows like eyes. Haynes did not smile. "Many have said so, sir. And many have been wrong." "No, sir," said Haynes quietly. "Not always." The remark passed softly between them, then vanished into the carpeted hush. By 7 o'clock, dinner had been served in the long dining room, where candles burned in silver branches and the fire reflected redly upon polished mahogany. Snow whispered against the panes. Somewhere in the walls, old pipes gave a sigh like someone turning in sleep. Mrs. Vale sat at the head of the table in black silk, composed and pale. Her nephew Adrian sat to her right, handsome, impatient, tapping one finger beside his wineglass. Mr. Larkin, the solicitor, unfolded his napkin with careful precision. Reverend Pike bowed his head over the soup, and Miss Clara Wynne, the governess, kept her eyes lowered, though she seemed to hear everything. Mr. Gray had been seated halfway down the table, opposite a tall window curtained in heavy velvet. From there, he could see the room. And perhaps the room could see him. Conversation moved gently at first. The snowstorm, the impassable roads, the poor condition of the bridge near Marlow Copse, ordinary subjects, each laid upon the table like a card no one meant to play. Then Mr. Gray said, "Has Blackthorn House always been so quiet?" Adrian smiled without warmth. "Old houses are quiet, sir. It is one of their few virtues." "I have found," Mr. Gray replied, "that quiet places often speak most clearly." Mrs. Vale lifted her eyes. "And what does this house say to you?" The candlelight moved across Mr. Gray's face. "That many people have listened here without wishing to be heard." The soup spoon in Miss Clara's hand touched the bowl with the faintest sound. Mr. Larkin cleared his throat. "A poetic observation." "Not poetic," said Mr. Gray, "architectural." That made Mrs. Vale pause. He looked toward the walls. The vents are older than the heating system. There are speaking tubes behind the paneling, blocked now perhaps, but once they carried voices from room to room. And the doorways are placed so that mirrors answer mirrors. A person standing in the West Passage could see who entered the library without being seen. Adrian's smile faded. "You know a great deal for a lost traveler." "I notice what houses permit me to notice." At the far end of the room, Haynes poured wine without spilling a drop, though his hand had stiffened. Mrs. Vale said, "Blackthorn was built by my grandfather. He distrusted servants, guests, and family in equal measure. The house suited him." "Then perhaps," said Mr. Gray, "he built it to watch." No one laughed. After dinner, they returned to the drawing room, where the curtains had been drawn and the lamps shaded low. The fire burned softly, filling the air with the comforting scent of wood smoke and old wool. Wind pressed the snow against the glass in delicate, persistent taps. Mrs. Vale took her chair near the hearth. Adrian stood behind her with one arm upon the mantel. Miss Clara sat near the piano, her hands folded in her lap. Mr. Larkin examined a chessboard as if the pieces might rescue him from conversation. Mr. Gray wandered toward the bookshelves. He did not touch the books. Instead, he looked at the narrow strip of wall between two cases. "There was once a door here," he said. Mrs. Vale's knitting companion, Miss Marrow, who had been silent all evening, stopped moving her needles. Adrian gave a short laugh. "Are you a builder now?" "No," said Mr. Gray. "Only a man who dislikes pretending not to see hinges painted over." He ran one finger lightly along the molding. Beneath layers of varnish, a line could just be seen. Mrs. Vale's voice cooled. "That passage has been closed for years." "Why?" "Because it leads nowhere." Mr. Gray turned. "Most closed passages lead somewhere people prefer not to go." The fire snapped. A small flame leaned sideways as if listening. Reverend Pike rose and moved toward the window. "The storm is worsening." "Yes," said Mr. Gray. "It would be difficult for anyone to leave tonight." "Or arrive," added Mr. Larkin. A silence followed. It was not long, but it was complete. Then from somewhere above them came a sound. A faint scrape, like furniture being moved across an empty room. Mrs. Vale turned sharply toward the ceiling. Adrian said, "The wind." "No," whispered Miss Clara. Everyone looked at her. She flushed, then lowered her gaze. "Forgive me, I only meant the wind does not come from the East Tower." The words seemed to dim the room. Mr. Gray's eyes moved to her with quiet interest. "The East Tower." "A closed part of the house," Mrs. Vale said quickly. "Unheated, unused, and unsafe. Yet not silent." Adrian stepped forward. "Sir, you presume too much." "I presume nothing. I observe." Mr. Gray looked again toward the ceiling. "And Blackthorn House appears determined to assist me." At that moment, the clock in the hall struck 9. With the final chime, a draft passed through the drawing room. The lamps flickered. The fire bent low. And behind the bookcase from the sealed place in the wall came the unmistakable sound of a latch lifting. Miss Marrow gasped. Haynes appeared in the doorway, pale and rigid. "Madam," he said, "the east passage door is open." Mrs. Vale did not rise. For the first time that evening, her composure failed. Not dramatically, not with tears, only with a stillness so deep it seemed she had ceased to breathe. Mr. Gray crossed the room. "Then perhaps," he said softly, "the house has grown tired of keeping secrets." No one invited him to follow. Yet they all went. Haynes carried a lamp. Its flame swayed as they moved through the corridor, past portraits and darkened sconces, past rugs faded by generations of careful footsteps. The walls narrowed near the east wing. The air cooled. The smell changed too, losing wood smoke and polish, gaining dust, stone, and something dry as old paper. At the end of the passage stood a door that had not been opened in years. It stood open now. Beyond it, a narrow stair climbed into darkness. Mrs. Vale stopped at the threshold, no further. But Mr. Gray had already seen what lay on the floor. A trail of melted snow. Not much, only a few pale marks across the dust. Someone had used the passage recently. He knelt beside them, touched the stone, and looked back at the others. "The house watches," he said, "but someone has been watching through the house." Adrian's face tightened. "This is absurd." "Is it?" Mr. Gray asked. He lifted the lamp and turned it toward the inner wall. There, above the stair, someone had wiped dust from a small round opening no larger than a coin. A listening tube. And below it, freshly scratched into the old plaster, were 3 words. "Ask A.T. Dusk." Miss Clara brought a hand to her throat. Mrs. Vale whispered, "Isabel." The name passed through the passage like a breath from the past. Mr. Gray looked at her then, calmly, almost sadly. "So the house has spoken before." No one answered. Far above in the east tower, something moved again. Not loudly. Only once. A soft step. Then silence. And in that silence, every person understood the same terrible comfort. Blackthorn House had not been empty, had not been sleeping, had not forgotten. It had watched them all. And now, at last, it was beginning to tell what it had seen. Chapter 3. A visitor without a face. The stranger arrived without a face, or so it seemed to those who first saw him through the snow. It was Haynes, the butler, who opened the door at Blackthorn House shortly after 5 o'clock, when dusk had softened the edges of the moor and the lamps were being lit in the long corridors. Outside, winter pressed close to the threshold. Snow moved through the air in pale, unhurried sheets, and beyond the gateposts the world had become a blur of white hedges, black trees, and vanishing road. The man on the step wore a dark hat pulled low, a wool scarf drawn high, and a heavy traveling coat powdered at the shoulders. Only his eyes were visible. Calm eyes. Watchful eyes. Not the eyes of a man lost in a storm. "I beg your pardon," he said, his voice muffled but composed. "I have missed the road to Brindleford. Might I trouble the house for shelter until morning?" Haynes did not answer at once. He had served Blackthorn House for 36 years and had learned that hesitation was often wiser than speech. Behind the stranger, the snow made no sound as it covered his footprints. "Your name, sir?" A pause. Elias Gray. It was an ordinary name, offered with ordinary politeness, and yet Haynes felt in the quiet chamber of his old instincts that it had been chosen rather than given. He admitted him. The entrance hall received the stranger in amber light and polished shadow. Coats hung along the oak paneling. A grandfather clock breathed time into the silence. Above the staircase, portraits of dead Vales looked down with expressions of permanent judgment. The stranger removed his hat, but not his scarf. "May I take your things, sir?" Haynes asked. "The coat, yes. The scarf, if you do not mind, I will keep a moment longer. The cold has settled in my throat." A reasonable answer. Too reasonable, perhaps. As Haynes helped him from the coat, something fell softly onto the stone floor. A small piece of blue thread. The stranger saw it at once and placed his shoe over it before Haynes could bend. Then he smiled with his eyes. Snow clings everywhere. Haynes said nothing. In the drawing room, Mrs. Elspeth Vale sat beside the fire, a shawl about her shoulders and a book unopened in her lap. She was a woman built of discipline, grief, and old manners, and in Blackthorn House those 3 qualities were nearly indistinguishable. Haynes announced the visitor. "Mr. Elias Gray, madam, a traveler delayed by the weather." Mrs. Vale looked up. For one brief moment, her face remained calm. Then her gaze moved to the scarf still concealing the lower half of his features. "My dear sir," she said, "you must be half frozen. Come nearer the fire." "You are very kind." He crossed the carpet with quiet steps. Near the mantel stood Adrian Vale, Mrs. Vale's nephew, holding a glass of sherry he had not been drinking. Miss Clara Wynne sat near the window with embroidery in her lap. Reverend Pike warmed his hands at the hearth, while Mr. Larkin, the family solicitor, examined the stranger with a careful professional stillness. Miss Marrow, the companion, did not look at him directly. She looked instead at his gloves. They were black leather, well kept and still damp from the snow. "A poor night for travel," Reverend Pike offered. "The poor nights," said Mr. Gray, "are often the ones that bring us where we were meant to be." Adrian gave a faint laugh. "Then you are fortunate. Blackthorn House is rarely anyone's destination." "Rarely," the stranger agreed. The single word settled into the room like dust. Mrs. Vale gestured toward a chair. "Sit, Mr. Gray. Haynes will bring tea." He bowed slightly and took the chair nearest the fire, but angled himself so the lamplight did not fall fully upon him. His scarf remained in place. The shadows loved him. They gathered around his cheekbones and beneath his brow, leaving the room to imagine what they could not see. And people imagine most dangerously when given only half a face. Tea arrived on a silver tray. Porcelain clicked gently. The fire crackled. Outside, the snow brushed the glass with a soft, private insistence. Mrs. Vale poured. "Do you come from far away?" "Far enough." "Business or family?" The stranger accepted the cup with gloved hands. "Family business." At the word family, Adrian's finger tightened around his glass. Mr. Larkin noticed. So did the stranger. Miss Clara lowered her needle into the linen, but did not draw the thread through. "Have you relations in Brindleford?" Mrs. Vale asked. "No longer." "I am sorry." "Loss," said Mr. Gray, "is a room one learns to live in." No one replied. For a while, conversation walked safely around the edges of things. The bridge near Marlow Copse, the storm, the state of the roads, the possibility that the household might remain snowbound for 2 days, all harmless subjects spoken in low voices while the stranger listened. He listened beautifully. Not eagerly, not rudely. He listened as if every pause were a word, every glance a confession, every nervous habit a door left slightly open. Once, when Adrian moved to pour more sherry, Mr. Gray's eyes followed his right hand. There was an old signet ring there, gold worn thin at the edges. The stranger's gaze rested on it just long enough. "An interesting ring," he said. Adrian looked down. "My father S. Was he fond of the East Tower?" The question was so soft that for a moment it seemed not to have been asked at all. Mrs. Vale's cup stopped halfway to her lips. Mr. Larkin looked sharply at the stranger. Miss Marrow's knitting needles ceased their whispering. Adrian smiled, but his color had changed. "I do not recall mentioning the East Tower." "No," said Mr. Gray, "you did not." "Then how would you know of it?" The stranger placed his teacup on its saucer. "Old houses are often described by their towers." "Not ours," said Mrs. Vale. Her voice was gentle, but beneath it lay iron. Mr. Gray inclined his head. "Then forgive the assumption." Yet the apology did not ease the room. It tightened it. From the hall came the faint sound of the grandfather clock preparing to strike 6. The house seemed to draw breath around them. Even the fire reduced itself to embers and soft gold light. Then Miss Clara spoke. "You have been here before." Everyone turned. The stranger's eyes moved to her, calm as winter water. "No, Miss Wynne." She stiffened. "I did not give you my name." A very small silence followed. Adrian said, "Haynes may have mentioned it." "Haynes did not," Clara replied. The stranger did not deny it again. Instead, he lifted one gloved hand to his scarf and loosened it only slightly, enough to reveal the line of his mouth. It was a grave mouth, neither cruel nor kind, but marked by long restraint. "I have not been in this house before," he said, "but I have known it for many years." Mrs. Vale's face had grown pale. "In what manners?" in stories told reluctantly, in letters never sent, in a drawing made by a woman who remembered the shape of every window. The name Isabel was not spoken, but it entered the room all the same. It entered through the portrait above the mantel, through the chill beneath the door, through Mrs. Vale's sudden stillness. Adrian set down his glass too hard. "This is improper." "Yes," said Mr. Gray softly. "Many things in this house were improper. Few were named so at the time." Mr. Larkin rose. "Sir, I must ask your purpose." "My purpose is simple." "Then state it." The stranger looked around the room at each face in turn. He seemed not to accuse, but to measure. A solicitor's caution, a nephew's temper, a reverend's lowered eyes, a companion's dread, a governess's memory, an old woman's sorrow sealed too long beneath etiquette. Then he removed his gloves. On his left hand, across the knuckles, lay a scar. Miss Marrow gave a soft cry. Mrs. Vale whispered, "That mark." The stranger untied the scarf completely. At last his face was visible. Not remarkable, perhaps, not frightening, but once seen, impossible to forget. There was something of the Vale family in the brow, something of the portrait above the mantle in the eyes, and beneath his jaw a small crescent-shaped birthmark, pale against the skin. The room seemed to lose its warmth. "My name," he said, "is not Elias Gray." Mrs. Vale's hand trembled against the arm of her chair. "I was raised under that name, but before that I was given another, a name written only once in a letter hidden in the lining of a blue velvet dress." His eyes lifted to the portrait. "Isabel called me Thomas." The fire settled with a quiet sigh. No one spoke. Outside, snow covered the windows until the room appeared suspended in a white and soundless world. Thomas Gray, the visitor without a face, stood among them at last unveiled. "I have come," he said, "not for money, nor revenge, nor scandal. I have come because every child has the right to know the truth of his mother's last night." Mrs. Vale bowed her head. Adrian looked toward the door, as though the house itself might let him escape. But Blackthorn House was watching. The portraits watched. The mirrors watched. The sealed doors and hidden passages watched. And the stranger, no longer hidden behind wool and shadow, watched most patiently of all. For the first time that evening, his face was fully seen. And with it, the past had entered the room. Chapter 4. The unsettling arrival. The arrival became unsettling only after everyone pretended it was not. At first, it was merely a sound beneath the storm, the dull roll of wheels somewhere beyond the white veil of snow, then the faint jingle of harness, then a horse's tired breath rising like smoke in the dusk. Blackthorn House had already folded itself into evening. Lamps glowed behind drawn curtains. Fires had been stirred. The long corridors smelled of beeswax, old wood, and rain-soaked wool drying by the kitchen range. Mrs. Elspeth Vale had just settled into her chair in the drawing room when Haynes appeared at the door. "A carriage, madam." She looked up from the letter she was not reading. "At this hour?" "Yes, madam," stopped at the front steps. No one in the room spoke at once. Adrian Vale stood by the mantel, turning his father's gold signet ring around his finger. Mr. Larkin, the solicitor, paused over the chessboard. Reverend Pike lowered his teacup. Miss Clara Wynne, seated near the window, listened to the muffled sounds outside with a stillness that made her seem younger than she was. Only Miss Marrow continued knitting. But more slowly. Mrs. Vale closed the letter. "Then we must receive whoever it is. No one travels through such weather by choice." "Quite," murmured Mr. Larkin. "That is what makes it curious." The front bell rang. Not loudly. Not urgently. Once. Its sound moved through the house like a question entering a church. Haynes withdrew. The others remained where they were, but every ear followed him down the corridor. They heard the great door open. A gust of winter air moved through the hall. Low voices followed, one familiar, one unknown. Then footsteps. Measured footsteps. Not the hurried steps of a man grateful for shelter, nor the uncertain tread of one who had lost his way. These were quiet, deliberate, and strangely untroubled by the storm outside. Haynes returned with the visitor behind him. "Mr. Elias Gray, madam. His carriage wheel has split near the lower road. He requests shelter until repairs may be made." The man bowed. He wore a dark coat, silvered with snow at the shoulders, and a scarf drawn neatly about his throat. His hair was damp from the weather, his gloves black, his posture calm. Nothing in him seemed remarkable, yet everyone looked at him a moment longer than politeness required. Perhaps it was because his face was difficult to remember even while one was looking at it. Perhaps it was because he seemed to know the room before he entered it. Mrs. Vale rose. "Mr. Gray, you are welcome. Blackthorn House is no inn, but it is dry and warm." "You are generous, Mrs. Vale." Her fingers tightened faintly on the back of her chair. "I do not recall giving you my name." The room grew quiet. Mr. Gray inclined his head. "Your butler announced me to the mistress of the house. I made the natural assumption." A simple explanation. Too simple, Clara thought. Mrs. Vale accepted it with a small nod. "Come to the fire, you must be chilled." "Less than I ought to be." Adrian gave a short laugh, a philosophical traveler. "A practical one," said Mr. Gray. "Cold is more bearable when one has expected it." Haynes brought brandy. The visitor accepted it but did not drink. He held the glass in his gloved hand, allowing the firelight to tremble in the amber liquid. For a few minutes, conversation kept to safe paths. The storm, the road, the broken wheel, the depth of snow near the bridge. Outside, the wind pressed softly against the windows, and inside, the lamps made small circles of gold against the dark. Then Mr. Gray turned his gaze to the mantel. Above it hung the portrait of Isabel Vale. The room did not change, and yet everything altered. He looked at the painted young woman for only a few seconds, but those seconds stretched. Isabel's dark eyes, captured forever in youth and sadness, seemed almost to look back at him. Mrs. Vale said, "My daughter." "Yes." The word was quiet. Not sympathetic. Not surprised. "Certainly." Adrian turned from the fire. "You knew of her." "I knew of the portrait." "How?" Mr. Gray finally lifted the brandy to his lips, though barely enough to taste it. "Blackthorn House has been painted in more than one hand. Some remember the woman at the window better than the house itself." Mrs. Vale sat down very slowly. Miss Marrow's needles clicked once, then stopped. Reverend Pike cleared his throat. "You are an admirer of old houses, Mr. Gray." "Of old houses, yes, and of what they choose to keep." "Stone keeps nothing," Adrian said. "On the contrary," said Mr. Gray. "Stone keeps footsteps, doors keep hesitation, staircases remember weight, even locked rooms remember the hands that closed them." A coal fell in the grate. No one moved. Miss Clara lowered her eyes to her embroidery, but her needle had pierced the same place twice. Mr. Larkin spoke with polished caution. "You have a poetic manner, sir." "I hope not. Poetry beautifies. I prefer accuracy." Adrian smiled. "Then accurately, Mr. Gray, what brings you to this house?" "My carriage wheel, as Haynes said." "And before that?" "A road." "And before that?" Mr. Gray looked at him gently. A question. The answer unsettled the room more than a refusal would have done. Mrs. Vale lifted her chin. "What question?" Mr. Gray placed the untouched brandy on a small table. "Not yet." The words were soft, almost courteous, but beneath them lay the unmistakable knowledge of a man who had arranged the order of events long before arriving. Dinner was announced soon after. They moved to the dining room through corridors that seemed darker than usual, though every lamp had been lit. At the long table, candle flames leaned and steadied, as if breathing with the house. Snow tapped at the high windows. Silver flashed softly. Porcelain sounded delicate against mahogany. Mr. Gray was seated between Reverend Pike and Miss Clara. He ate little, he listened much. When Reverend Pike spoke of village matters, Mr. Gray asked nothing about the church, yet knew the bell had cracked in winter some 30 years earlier. When Mr. Larkin mentioned old legal disputes, Mr. Gray named no family papers, yet glanced exactly toward the locked cabinet where they were kept. When Adrian joked about ghosts in the East Wing, Mr. Gray did not smile. Instead, he asked, "Do they still walk there?" Adrian froze. Mrs. Vale's knife touched her plate. "There are no ghosts at Blackthorn," she said. "No," Mr. Gray replied. "Only memories people mistake for them." After dinner, the drawing room seemed smaller. Perhaps the storm had pressed the walls inward. Perhaps suspicion had. Haynes reported that the visitor's driver had been lodged in the servants' hall and the carriage placed beneath the stable roof. Repairs could not be attempted until morning. So, Adrian said, our guest remains. For one night only, said Mr. Gray. One night can be long in this house, Miss Marrow murmured. Everyone looked at her. She blushed and resumed knitting, though the pattern had gone wrong. The clock struck 9. At the final chime, Mr. Gray rose and walked toward the portrait of Isabel. He stood beneath it without touching the frame. She was very young. Mrs. Vale did not answer. 23, he asked. 22, said Clara. The reply escaped before she could stop it. Mr. Gray turned. You remembered. Clara's face had gone pale. Everyone knew. No, said Mr. Gray softly. Everyone was told. The fire shifted, sending a brief flare of light across the room. In that instant, Mrs. Vale's expression revealed something terrible, not guilt alone, but recognition. She knew now, Clara thought. She knew this man had not arrived by accident. Adrian stepped forward. This has gone far enough. Not far enough, said Mr. Gray. Not yet. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small square of blue velvet, folded and worn at the edges. Mrs. Vale stared at it as though it had been taken from a grave. My daughter had a dress of that color, she whispered. Yes, said Mr. Gray. She wore it the last night she was seen alive. Reverend Pike lowered his head. Mr. Larkin shut his eyes for the briefest moment. Adrian said, leave this house. But outside, the snow had buried the road, and no one could leave. Mr. Gray unfolded the velvet. Inside lay a brass key, dark with age. Do you recognize it? Mrs. Vale's lips trembled. Miss Clara answered instead. The East Tower. The words made the room colder. Mr. Gray looked at each of them, patient as snowfall. My arrival has unsettled you, he said. Forgive me, it was meant to. No one breathed. He placed the key on the table. It made the smallest sound. Yet in that sound, Blackthorn House seemed to wake around them, its walls listening, its shadows leaning close, its long silence finally disturbed. And the stranger, who had come in from the snow with a broken wheel and a borrowed name, stood quietly among them as if he had not arrived at all. As if he had returned. Chapter 5. Whispers beneath polite conversation. By 9:30, everyone in Blackthorn House had learned the same delicate art, how to speak of nothing while listening for everything. The snow had thickened against the windows, softening the world beyond the glass until the moor, the road, and the bare winter trees had vanished into a single pale silence. Inside, the drawing room glowed with firelight and lamplight, cozy enough to soothe any ordinary gathering. The curtains were drawn, tea steamed in porcelain cups. A silver tray of biscuits rested untouched upon the table. Yet beneath the warmth, beneath the low voices and careful manners, something colder moved. Mr. Elias Gray sat near the hearth, his chair angled so that he could see every face without seeming to study anyone too closely. He had arrived with a broken carriage wheel, a borrowed name, and a brass key wrapped in blue velvet. Since then, no one had been quite able to breathe naturally. Mrs. Elspeth Vale held her teacup in both hands, though she had not taken a sip. Adrian Vale stood by the mantel, smiling too often and too sharply. Mr. Larkin, the solicitor, examined the chessboard near the window with an interest far beyond its pieces. Reverend Pike kept his gaze lowered, as if the carpet contained some moral instruction. Miss Marrow knitted rapidly, then slowly, then not at all. And Miss Clara Wynne sat with her embroidery folded in her lap, hearing old memories stir behind the walls. Mr. Gray broke the silence first. Do forgive me, he said gently. I fear my arrival has made conversation difficult. Not at all, Mrs. Vale replied. Her voice was calm, but the room knew it was not true. A storm always unsettles a house, Mr. Larkin added. Does it? Asked Mr. Gray. I have often found storms useful. They prevent interruptions. Adrian turned, and departures. Mr. Gray inclined his head. Quite. The fire gave a soft crack. A coal collapsed inward, sending a brief golden flicker across Isabel Vale's portrait above the mantel. Her painted eyes seemed darker tonight, her blue dress almost alive in the low light. Mrs. Vale noticed Mr. Gray looking at it. "You have a great interest in my daughter." "I have a great interest in truth." "Truth," Adrian said, "is a word men use when they wish to excuse rudeness." "And secrecy," Mr. Gray replied, "is a habit families call dignity." No one spoke. The words had been delivered softly, almost sadly, but they fell with precision. Miss Marrow resumed knitting, though one needle slipped and clicked against the floor. The sound made Reverend Pike flinch. He bent to retrieve it, and for a moment his hand trembled visibly in the firelight. Mr. Gray saw. So did Clara. Mrs. Vale said, "Reverend, you are unwell." "Only tired, madam." "Old memories fatigue us," Mr. Gray said. Reverend Pike straightened. "Some memories are best left to prayer." "And some prayers," said Mr. Gray, "are merely silence dressed in respectable clothing." The Reverend's face paled. Adrian laughed under his breath. "You speak like a man who has already judged us." "No," said Mr. Gray, "I am still listening." That somehow was worse. The polite conversation resumed, thinner now, like ice over deep water. Mr. Larkin asked whether the visitor had traveled often in winter. Mr. Gray said he preferred winter roads because footprints were honest in snow. Mrs. Vale asked whether he had family. Mr. Gray answered that everyone has family, though not everyone is permitted to know it. Adrian asked where he had learned such theatrical phrases. Mr. Gray replied, "From people who were forced to speak carefully." Each answer was mild. Each one opened a door. At last Haynes entered to tend the fire. He moved with the silent efficiency of a man who had spent decades making himself invisible. But as he placed another log upon the embers, his gaze went once, only once, to the blue velvet bundle lying on the side table. The brass key within it caught the light. "Haynes," said Mr. Gray. The butler paused. "Sir." "How long have you served at Blackthorn?" 36 years, sir." "Then you were here when Miss Isabel died." The air seemed to tighten around the old servant. Mrs. Vale said, "Mr. Gray." But Haynes answered, "Yes, sir." "What do you remember of that night?" Adrian stepped forward. Servants remember what they are told to remember. Haynes looked at him, and for the first time that evening, something like pain moved across his face. "I remember snow," he said quietly. "Though not as heavy as tonight, I remember the doctor arriving before he was sent for. I remember the east wing being locked by morning." Mrs. Vale closed her eyes. Mr. Larkin murmured, "Old grief should not be made entertainment." Mr. Gray turned to him. "Then let us not entertain it, let us examine it." The solicitor's expression hardened. "You are not an officer of the law." "No." "A magistrate?" "No." "Then by what authority do you conduct this interrogation?" Mr. Gray's voice softened. "By the authority of the unanswered." The room fell quiet again. Outside, snow slid from some high ledge and landed with a muffled thud. Miss Clara started. Adrian noticed and smiled. "Miss Wynne remembers nothing," he said. "She was a child." Clara lifted her gaze. "Yes," she said. "Children are often the best witnesses. Adults forget to fear them." Adrian's smile vanished. Mrs. Vale whispered, "Clara." But Clara had already gone too far to retreat. "I remember voices," she continued. "Not words, not all of them, but tones, Miss Isabel crying, a man laughing softly, someone telling her she would thank them in time." Reverend Pike bowed his head. Mr. Gray watched him. "Did you hear that too, Reverend?" The Reverend pressed his hands together. "I heard nothing. Nothing at all. I was not in the house." Mr. Gray looked toward Haynes. The butler's face remained still. But silence in that room had become a language. Mr. Gray said, "You were called here that night, Reverend, not for a dying woman but for a living scandal." Reverend Pike stood abruptly. "I will not be spoken to in this manner." "No," said Mr. Gray. "You were not spoken to then either. You were asked to bless a lie after it had already been arranged." The Reverend's lips parted, but no denial came. A draft moved through the drawing room, carrying the faint scent of dust. The fire bent low, then rose again. Behind the bookcase, somewhere within the wall, there came a whispering sound. Not a voice. Not quite. A dry murmur, like paper drawn across wood. Everyone heard it. Miss Merrill whispered, "The passage." Mr. Larkin said too quickly, "Rats." "There are no rats in the east wall," Haynes said. The butler seemed surprised by his own words. Mr. Gray rose. No one stopped him as he crossed to the bookcase. He placed his palm against the narrow panel where the hidden passage had once been sealed. For several seconds he listened. The room listened with him. Then he said, "Someone is there." Adrian reached for the poker beside the hearth. "Enough." Mr. Gray turned calmly, "Put it down." The authority in his voice was so quiet that Adrian obeyed before he realized he had done so. Haynes stepped forward and pressed a concealed latch beneath the shelf. The panel resisted, then opened with a sigh of old wood and trapped air. Darkness waited beyond it. A colder darkness than the room. From inside came the smell of stone, dust, and extinguished candles. Haynes lifted a lamp. On the floor of the passage lay a torn strip of paper, recently disturbed. Mr. Gray bent and picked it up. The writing was faded, but the ink could still be read. He held it near the flame. Miss Clara whispered, "What does it say?" Mr. Gray read aloud. "He wears father's ring." Adrian's hand went instantly to the gold signet on his finger. Too instantly. Every eye followed. Mrs. Vale's face changed, not with surprise, but with the weary horror of something suspected and refused. Mr. Gray looked at Adrian. "Your father wore that ring the night Isabel was locked in the tower." Adrian swallowed. "A dead man cannot defend himself." "No," said Mr. Gray, "but the living can reveal why they fear him being named." The snow whispered against the windows. The firelight softened the room again, as if trying to return comfort where none could remain. Mr. Gray folded the paper carefully and placed it beside the brass key. The conversation, polite a moment before, had become something else entirely. Every gentle phrase had hidden a blade. Every silence had pointed toward the same locked door. And somewhere above them, in the east tower, the house gave one faint creak. Like a witness preparing to speak. Chapter 6. The clues no one notices. The smallest clue in a great house is never truly small. It waits beneath the edge of a carpet, behind a careless word, inside the pause before a denial. It asks no one to see it. It simply remains, patient and faithful, until the right pair of eyes arrives. At Blackthorn House, those eyes belonged to the stranger who was not entirely a stranger. Mr. Elias Gray stood in the opened passage behind the drawing-room bookcase, holding a lamp in one hand and a torn scrap of paper in the other. Behind him, the household gathered in a narrow half-circle, unwilling to follow and unable to leave. The passage smelled of cold stone, dead dust, and wax long ago extinguished. Its walls were close enough to brush a shoulder. The floor was lined with a thin gray powder that had lain undisturbed for years, except where someone had recently crossed it. Mr. Gray lowered the lamp. "There," he said. Adrian Vale gave an impatient breath. "There is nothing." "That," said Mr. Gray, "is what makes it useful." On the dusty floor were prints, faint, broken, almost invisible. Not the heavy tread of Haynes, nor the narrow step of Miss Clara, nor the uncertain shuffle of Reverend Pike. These marks were made by a boot with a worn outer heel. Mr. Gray looked at Adrian's polished shoes. Adrian smiled coldly. "You cannot mean to accuse a man by the shape of a footprint." "No," said Mr. Gray, "only by the effort he makes to hide it." He pointed to the edge of the passage. The dust had been brushed aside near the wall carefully, but not completely. Whoever had passed through had tried to erase the trail, yet had forgotten the corners where dust gathers honestly. Mrs. Vale whispered, "Who would come here now?" "Someone who feared what had been left here then." The words settled softly, and no one disputed them. Haynes lifted the lamp higher. The light touched a narrow listening tube in the wall, its brass rim polished clean by recent fingers. Mr. Gray leaned toward it. "This tube leads where?" Haynes hesitated. "The morning room, sir, and from there through the old nursery wall." Miss Clara drew in a quiet breath. "The nursery," she said. Mr. Gray turned to her. "You remember it." "I slept near it when I was a child. Servants, children were sometimes put there when the house was full. And could one hear the East Tower from there? Clara looked down. If the house was very quiet. Blackthorn House was very quiet now. They followed the passage slowly, not because the distance was great, but because each step seemed to carry them further from the present. Snow whispered beyond unseen walls. Somewhere below, a fire shifted in its grate. The house creaked once, like an old witness adjusting in its chair. At the end of the passage, Haynes opened a narrow door into the morning room. It was a gentle chamber, seldom used in winter, with faded yellow curtains, a writing desk, and a round table covered by a lace cloth. A cold fire had been laid in the grate but not lit. The air smelled faintly of lavender and shut drawers. Mr. Gray did not examine the obvious things. He did not go first to the desk. He went to the window. On the sill beneath a curtain fold lay 3 drops of melted snow. "Someone stood here after we entered the drawing room," he said. Mr. Larkin frowned. "The window may leak." "It may, but leaks do not carry soot." Mr. Gray touched 1 drop with his finger and held it near the lamp. A gray smear marked his skin. "Soot from the old chimney stair," Haynes murmured. Adrian turned sharply. "How would you know?" "Because I cleaned it for 30 years, sir." The butler's reply was respectful, but not obedient. Mr. Gray moved next to the writing desk. Its surface was immaculate, yet the blotter sat slightly askew. He lifted it. Beneath it lay a pale rectangle in the dust where paper had rested until recently. "A letter removed," said Mr. Larkin. "Perhaps," Mr. Gray tilted the lamp, "or returned after many years and removed again." Miss Marrow, standing near the door, pressed her knitting bag to her chest. "This is wickedness, disturbing the dead." Mr. Gray looked at her kindly. "No, madam, the dead were disturbed long ago. We are disturbing the living." Her eyes filled, but she said nothing. Then came the clue no one noticed until it was named. The scent. Not lavender. Not dust. A trace beneath both. Violet water. Mr. Gray turned toward Mrs. Vale. "Who wears violet scent?" Mrs. Vale looked surprised. "No one, not now." "Not now. My daughter did." The room seemed to cool. Mr. Gray crossed to a small cabinet in the corner. Its keyhole was bright, scraped by recent use. Haynes searched his ring and found the key. Inside were old linens, a cracked fan, and a folded pair of gloves. Blue velvet gloves. Mrs. Vale made the smallest sound. Mr. Gray lifted 1 glove by the fingertips. A seam had been cut open. Within the lining was a tiny curl of paper, no larger than a postage stamp. He unfolded it with care. Only 4 words remained legible. "I heard him laughing." Miss Clara closed her eyes. Reverend Pike whispered, "Mercy." Adrian's voice was dry. "Anyone could have written that." "Yes," said Mr. Gray, "but not anyone would have hidden it inside a glove belonging to Isabel Vale." He placed the note beside the first scrap. The 2 pieces did not form a whole, but they spoke the same language, fragments left by someone who knew she might not be believed. They returned to the drawing room near 10 o'clock. The fire had burned low, and the lamp seemed softer, as if the house had grown tired of withholding its breath. On the table lay the brass key, the torn paper, the blue velvet, and now the glove with its secret. Objects so delicate one might have mistaken them for keepsakes. But they were not keepsakes. They were witnesses. Mr. Gray stood beside them, hands folded behind his back. "Let us consider what no one noticed," he said. "A passage recently used, a listening tube polished by fingers, snow mixed with soot in the morning room, a missing paper, violet scent where none has been worn for 30 years, a glove cut open and searched." Mr. Larkin's face was tense. "And what conclusion do you draw?" "That someone in this house knew these clues existed before tonight." Adrian laughed. "Your logic is smoke." "No, smoke leaves soot." The reply was quiet, but it struck its mark. Mrs. Vale turned toward her nephew. "Adrian." He looked at her with injured astonishment. "Aunt, you cannot seriously." "I asked you nothing," she said. That stopped him. Outside, wind pressed against the windows, and a branch scratched softly across the glass. It sounded like writing. Mr. Gray picked up the brass key. This key opens the east tower. It was hidden in Isabel's blue velvet, yet tonight, before I showed it, someone had already entered the old passage. Why? Not to open the tower, to remove something from the rooms below it. Miss Clara looked toward the glove. The rest of the letter. Yes, said Mr. Gray. Haynes stepped forward slowly. Sir. In his hand lay a small object he had found beneath the morning room rug. A broken piece of sealing wax, dark red, stamped with part of a crest. Mr. Gray studied it. The Vale crest, said Mr. Larkin. Adrian's hand moved again to his father's ring. The same crest glinted there in gold. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Miss Marrow began to weep silently. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a trembling in her shoulders, as if grief had finally found the door it had been knocking upon for years. Mrs. Vale looked at her. You knew. Miss Marrow shook her head. Not all, only that Miss Isabel feared him, only that she hid things, only that after she died your brother made us swear never to speak of the tower. Why did you not tell me? You would not hear it, madam. The words were not cruel. That made them worse. Mr. Gray placed the broken wax beside the glove. There are clues one misses because they are small, he said, and clues one misses because seeing them would break the heart. Mrs. Vale bowed her head. The house was silent around them, but not empty. It held the snow, the firelight, the old rooms, the hidden passages, and the truth slowly assembling itself from overlooked things. And there, among them, lay the most important clue of all. Not the key, not the glove, not the footprint, but the fear on Adrian Vale's face whenever his father's name came near the light. Chapter 7. Certainty that feels too easy. By 10 o'clock, the mystery at Blackthorn House appeared to have arranged itself with suspicious neatness. The snow had deepened outside until the windows no longer reflected the moor, only the drawing room itself. The fire sinking low, the lamps glowing under amber shades, the portraits watching from their gilded frames, and the gathered faces of those who had spent too many years believing silence could become innocence. On the table lay the evidence. A brass key wrapped in faded blue velvet, a torn note hidden in a glove, a scrap of sealing wax bearing the Vale crest, a trail through dust, soot-stained snow upon a windowsill, small things, fragile things, yet together they pointed in one direction with the calm certainty of a compass. Toward Adrian Vale. He stood near the mantel, his father's signet ring gleaming on his hand, his expression composed only because pride had not yet decided whether to become anger or fear. Mrs. Elspeth Vale sat very still in her chair. Her eyes did not leave her nephew. Adrian, she said softly, tell me this is foolishness. He gave a short laugh. It is beyond foolishness, it is theatrical. Mr. Gray looked at him with that quiet patience which had unsettled them all from the moment he arrived. Then the theater has been well staged, he said. Your father's ring, your family crest, your discomfort whenever the East Tower is named. The passage recently used by someone whose boot wears down on the outer heel. Your boot, I believe, does precisely that. Adrian's mouth tightened. Haynes, standing by the door with a lamp in his hand, looked down despite himself. So did everyone else. Adrian's right heel was indeed slightly uneven, though polished to a shine. A worn heel, he said, is not a confession. No, Mr. Gray agreed, but it is a direction. And you have followed it eagerly. Too eagerly, perhaps. The words, so unexpected, altered the room. Mr. Larkin looked up sharply. Reverend Pike, who had sat with folded hands and lowered eyes, stirred as if waking from a prayer. Miss Clara Wynne, near the piano, turned her gaze from Adrian to Mr. Gray. Mrs. Vale whispered, "What do you mean?" Mr. Gray did not answer at once. He took the signet wax from the table and held it near the firelight. The broken red edge glowed briefly, like a coal with memory inside it. I mean, he said, that the evidence is convincing, almost too convincing. Adrian stared at him. For the first time that night, his anger faltered. Are you accusing me or defending me? I am listening to the evidence, said Mr. Gray, and it has begun to speak in a voice I do not trust. The room fell quiet again, but this was a different silence. Not the silence of guilt closing in, but of a door opening elsewhere. Mrs. Vale leaned forward. You said the clues pointed to him. They do. Then why hesitate? Because, said Mr. Gray, true guilt often hides badly. False guilt is arranged beautifully. A coal shifted in the hearth. Outside, a branch brushed the glass with the delicate scrape of a pen across paper. Mr. Gray turned to Haynes, when the passage was opened, who stood nearest the bookcase. Haynes considered. Mr. Adrian was by the mantel, sir, Mr. Larkin near the chessboard, Reverend Pike by the window, Miss Marrow beside Mrs. Vale, Miss Wynne near the piano. And you? At the door, sir. No one near the bookcase. No, sir. Yet the latch had been released from within. Adrian frowned. Within. Yes, the passage was not opened by someone in this room. It was opened from the other side. Miss Clara's hands tightened in her lap. Then someone was already inside the wall. Precisely. Mr. Gray placed the wax down, and that someone wished us to find what we found. Mr. Larkin gave a measured cough. You are suggesting the evidence was planted. I am suggesting we were guided. Adrian stepped away from the mantel. By whom? Mr. Gray looked around the room. No one moved. The firelight fluttered against the old walls. In the amber dimness, the house seemed to hold its breath. Let us review, said Mr. Gray gently. The blue velvet led us to the key led us to the tower. The passage led us to the morning room led us to the glove led us to Isabel's note, and the sealing wax led us to the ring. He paused. A perfect chain. Mrs. Vale said, and that is wrong. In life, madam, truth is rarely so polite. The phrase settled over them. Miss Marrow, pale and trembling, whispered, but Adrian's father did lock her in the tower. Mrs. Vale flinched. Mr. Gray turned to her. Yes, I believe he did, but tonight's question is not only who locked Isabel away 30 years ago, it is who in this house is shaping the story now. Adrian looked at Miss Marrow. You. She recoiled. No. Reverend Pike, he demanded. Larkin, Haynes, shall we take turns being accused? Mr. Gray's voice remained calm. Accusation is a blunt instrument. Observation is finer. He walked to the chessboard near the window. The pieces had been arranged for a game never played. Black Queen moved forward, White Knight missing. Mr. Gray lifted the empty square into the attention of the room. Mr. Larkin, you stood here earlier. I did. Did you notice the missing knight? The solicitor's expression barely changed. I noticed nothing of importance. How revealing. Mr. Larkin stiffened. I beg your pardon. A chess player always notices a missing piece, unless he is pretending not to. The solicitor's pale face cooled further. Mr. Gray reached beneath the curtain fold and produced the small ivory knight. It had been placed carefully upon the windowsill, near the soot-stained drops of melted snow. Miss Clara whispered, "Why hide a chess piece?" "To mark a place," said Mr. Gray, "or to signal one." He examined the figure. Around its base was wound a thread, blue, fine, almost invisible. The same blue as the thread Haynes had seen fall from the stranger's coat upon his arrival. Adrian saw it too. "You brought that," he said. Mr. Gray nodded, "Yes." A ripple of surprise passed through the room. Mrs. Vale stared at him. "You planted evidence." "No, madam, I planted a warning." He unwound the thread carefully. "When I entered Blackthorn House, I suspected I might not be the only person arranging a revelation. So I marked 3 places in the house with blue thread: the hall, the passage door, and this chess piece. If any were disturbed, I would know someone was moving ahead of us." Haynes said quietly, "The thread in the hall vanished." "And this one has been moved," said Mr. Gray. Mr. Larkin's lips thinned. "This is absurdly elaborate." "Quite," said Mr. Gray. "As elaborate as framing a frightened nephew with his dead father's ring." Adrian's face had gone strangely blank. Not relieved. Not grateful. Only confused, as though innocence had come too late to be comfortable. Mrs. Vale looked at him with new uncertainty. "Adrian." He turned away. "I hated what my father did, but I did not hide these things. I did not open that passage." The words were rough, stripped of polish. For once, they sounded true. Mr. Gray looked toward the door. No, I no longer believe you did." Then from beyond the drawing room came a faint sound. Not from above, not from the east tower, from below. A soft closing click, the sound of a door being shut with great care. Haynes lifted his lamp. The cellar passage. Mr. Gray looked at him. "Does it connect to the old chimney stair?" "Yes, sir. And from there to the morning room." Haynes nodded slowly. Mrs. Vale whispered, "Then someone has been beneath us." All evening they had looked upward, toward the tower, toward the portrait, toward the old story of Isabel crying behind a locked door. But the living secret had moved below their feet. The certainty that had seemed so complete now lay broken upon the table, as fragile as the china cup Mrs. Vale had dropped earlier, as misleading as candlelight in a mirrored hall. Mr. Gray picked up the lamp. "Then we must go down," he said. No one wished to follow, yet no one remained behind. For the house had offered them an answer too quickly, and in a mystery, the easiest answer is often not the truth. It is bait. Chapter 8. The mask begins to slip. There is a moment in every old deception when it stops resembling a wall and begins to resemble a curtain. At Blackthorn House, that moment came just after 10, when Mr. Gray lifted the lamp and led the others from the drawing room toward the cellar passage. No one spoke as they crossed the hall. The house seemed warmer behind them and colder ahead. The fires, the lamps, the velvet chairs, the china cups, all the gentle comforts of respectable life, remained above like a dream one might return to only by pretending nothing had happened. But the small click from below had changed everything. It had told them that the past was not merely hidden in portraits and locked towers. It was moving. Haynes unlocked the green baize door near the servants' stair. Beyond it, a narrow corridor descended in shallow steps. The air carried the scent of stone, coal dust, damp wood, and extinguished candle smoke. Snow pressed against the small high windows, turning them white and blind. Mrs. Vale followed with one hand upon the wall. Adrian walked behind her, pale and silent. Reverend Pike murmured half a prayer, then stopped when he realized everyone could hear. Mr. Larkin came last, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve as though manners could defend him against memory. Miss Clara carried a second lamp. Its flame trembled, but her hand did not. At the bottom of the steps, the cellar passage opened into a low-ceilinged hall lined with wine racks and storage doors. The stones beneath their feet were worn smooth by generations of servants. Here, the house did not watch through portraits. It listened through pipes, cracks, and old brick. Mr. Gray paused. "Extinguish one lamp," he said softly. Haynes looked uncertain. Mr. Gray nodded to Clara. She lowered the glass chimney and blew out her flame. Darkness deepened at once. The remaining lamp in Haynes's hand cast a single circle of honey-colored light. Beyond it, the corridor stretched away in blackness. Then they heard it. A whisper. Not words, not quite. A dry movement of fabric, perhaps, or breath, or a shoe shifting slowly on stone. Adrian reached toward the wall. "Someone is there." "Yes," said Mr. Gray, "and someone wishes us to know it." They moved on. At the end of the passage, near the old coal room, they found a door standing ajar. Haynes raised the lamp. Inside, shelves held broken crates, jars of preserves long spoiled, and bundles of linen tied with tape. On the floor lay a candle recently dropped, its wick still soft with warmth. Mr. Gray knelt beside it. "Fresh," Mrs. Vale whispered, "who would come here?" "The person who has been placing memories where we would find them." Mr. Larkin spoke sharply. "You continue to imply conspiracy, yet have named no conspirator." "No," said Mr. Gray, "because names are masks. Tonight I am more interested in when they slip." He looked at the solicitor as he said it. Mr. Larkin's face remained calm, but his fingers tightened around his walking stick. Adrian noticed. For the first time that night, suspicion moved away from him and settled elsewhere. Mr. Gray rose and examined the room. He did not hurry. His eyes moved over the floorboards stacked in the corner, the cold chimney arch, the old servant bells hanging mute upon the wall. Then he crossed to a trunk beneath a dust sheet. The lock had been forced. Inside lay several household ledgers, a moth-eaten shawl, and a narrow wooden box. Mrs. Vale drew in a breath. That belonged to Isabel. Mr. Gray lifted it carefully. The lid opened without resistance. It was empty except for a torn lining and a faint trace of violet scent. "The rest of the letter was here," Clara said. "Yes," said Mr. Gray, "until recently." Reverend Pike's voice trembled. "Perhaps it is better gone." Mr. Gray turned to him. "Better for whom?" The Reverend could not answer. From the corridor came another sound, this time unmistakable. A footstep retreating. Haynes lifted the lamp high. Adrian moved first, driven less by courage than impatience. They entered the passage again and saw, at its far end, the brief, dark shape of someone turning the corner. "Stop," Adrian called. The word struck the stone walls and came back smaller. Mr. Gray did not run. He only quickened his pace, calm and precise, as though following a thought to its conclusion. They reached the corner and found themselves before the old chimney stair, a tight spiral of soot-dark stone climbing toward the morning room. On the lowest step lay a handkerchief. White linened, monogrammed, Levi. Mrs. Vale stared at it. "That is mine." Adrian seized upon it too quickly. "Then my aunt." "No," said Mr. Gray. The word cut through him. Mr. Gray lifted the handkerchief and held it near the lamp. Too clean for this passage, too carefully placed, and folded the wrong way. Mrs. Vale looked at him faintly. "The wrong way." "You fold yours inward, madam, always. I noticed when you placed one beside your tea earlier. This is folded outward." Even in that cold cellar, the observation seemed to warm the air with its terrible intimacy. He had been watching everything, not rudely, not obviously, but completely. Mr. Larkin gave a thin smile. "A gifted performance." Mr. Gray turned. "Performance interests you, Mr. Larkin." "I dislike melodrama." "Do you dislike forgery as well?" The solicitor's smile vanished. The mask slipped only for an instant, but an instant is enough when the room is waiting for it. Mrs. Vale whispered, "Forgery." Mr. Gray reached into his inner pocket and withdrew the small scrap of paper found earlier in the passage. "He wears father's ring," he said. A useful accusation, directed at Adrian, supported by sealing wax from the Vale crest, elegant, simple, persuasive. Adrian looked at Mr. Larkin. "You wrote it." Mr. Larkin's voice was controlled. "Certainly not." "Then perhaps," said Mr. Gray, "you can explain why the ink contains iron gall with a blue-black undertone, modern stationery ink, not the brown fading of Isabel's letters, and why the hand imitates hers almost well, but makes the capital F in the solicitor's style you use in legal copies." A hush followed. Mr. Larkin's eyes moved toward the stairs. "Only briefly." But Mr. Gray saw. "So the mask begins to slip," he murmured. Mr. Larkin straightened. "You are a stranger in this house, sir. You arrive under a false name, disturb a grieving family, produce trinkets and scraps, and now accuse me of forgery on the strength of ink and handwriting." "No," said Mr. Gray, "on the strength of fear." He turned to Haynes, who had access to the old ledgers. "The family solicitor, sir, for the estate inventory last spring." Mrs. Vale's hand went to her throat. Mr. Gray continued, gently now. "That was when the East Tower roof was repaired. That was when the locket was found. That was when Mr. Larkin learned what Isabel had hidden and chose not to reveal it." The solicitor's pale face hardened. "Speculation." "Yes," said Mr. Gray, "let us improve it." He opened the wooden box again and removed the torn lining. Beneath the velvet backing, tucked into a split seam, lay something the searcher had missed. A small photograph, faded, curled at the edges. It showed Isabel Vale seated in the garden, one hand resting protectively over the swell of her dress. Beside her stood a young man, not Adrian's father, not a servant, not anyone in the room. At the bottom, in Isabel's hand, were 3 words. "For my son." Mrs. Vale began to weep without sound. Mr. Larkin's gaze fixed upon the photograph. In his eyes, for one unguarded second, lay not surprise but calculation, already working, already rearranging itself. Mr. Gray saw that too. "You were not hiding murder," he said softly. "You were hiding inheritance." The words changed the cellar more deeply than any cry could have done. Adrian stepped back. Reverend Pike made the sign of the cross. Haynes closed his eyes as if a burden had just been named. Mr. Larkin's mask returned, but not perfectly. There was a crack in it now. A fine one, visible in the tightness of his mouth, the dryness of his voice, the stillness of a man who has realized that every polite smile he ever wore has become evidence against him. "Absurd," he said, but the word had no strength. Above them, through the walls of Blackthorn House, the wind moved softly around the tower. The snow kept falling. The fire in the drawing room would be settling into embers now, waiting for them to return with their faces changed. Mr. Gray held the photograph close to the lamp. And in that small pool of light, the truth was no longer a shadow. It had features, it had motive, it had begun at last to show its face. Chapter 9. The Stranger Revealed. They returned from the cellar, as people return from a dream they cannot dismiss. No one spoke in the passage. Their footsteps moved softly over the old runners, past the portraits, past the lamps whose flames trembled in their glass chimneys. Beyond the windows, the snow still fell with a patience that seemed almost kind, covering the road, the garden, the iron gates, and the long, dark shape of the moor. In the drawing room, the fire had settled into embers. Haynes added a log, and the flames rose slowly, warming the silence but not breaking it. Mrs. Elspeth Vale sank into her chair beneath Isabel's portrait. Adrian stood apart, his face pale with a confusion that no longer looked like guilt. Reverend Pike remained near the curtains, one hand resting against the window frame. Miss Clara Wynne held the faded photograph as if it were a living thing. Miss Merrow wept quietly into her handkerchief. Mr. Larkin, the solicitor, stood by the chessboard. He looked exactly as he always had, neat, composed, respectable. And that was the most frightening thing about him. Mr. Gray placed the wooden box, the brass key, the blue velvet glove, the forged note, the broken sealing wax, and the photograph upon the table. One by one, the little objects made their soft sounds against the polished wood. A trial without a judge. A confession without a voice. Mrs. Vale looked from the photograph to Mr. Gray. "You said he was hiding inheritance." Mr. Gray nodded, "Yes." Mr. Larkin gave a dry laugh. "An inheritance cannot be stolen from a ghost, madam." "No," said Mr. Gray, "but it can be stolen from a child no one knew existed." The room grew very still. Mrs. Vale lifted her eyes toward the portrait. Isabel's painted face, young and sorrowful, watched from above the mantel, her blue dress catching the firelight like a fragment of twilight preserved in oil. "A child," Mrs. Vale whispered. Mr. Gray did not answer immediately. He stood in the glow of the lamps, still wearing the plain dark coat in which he had arrived. The scarf was gone. The borrowed name still hovered about him, but loosely now, like a mask untied. "At first," he said, "I believed I had come only to learn how my mother died." Mrs. Vale closed her eyes. "My mother," he continued softly, "was Isabel Vale." No one moved. Even the fire seemed to lower its voice. Adrian stared at him. "You?" "Yes." Mr. Gray touched the small crescent birthmark beneath his jaw. "She wrote of this mark in a letter given to the woman who raised me. A mark like a moon, she called it. Proof, if proof were ever needed, that I was hers." Miss Clara's hand went to her mouth. Mrs. Vale rose unsteadily, then sat again, as if the world had shifted beneath her feet. "You are Isabel's son." "My name is Thomas," he said. "Thomas Vale, though I was raised as Thomas Gray." The name seemed to move through the room like warmth, returning to a long-closed chamber. Mrs. Vale looked at him with a grief too old for tears. "I had a grandson." "Yes, and I never knew." "No," Thomas said gently. "That ignorance was arranged for you." His gaze turned to Mr. Larkin. The solicitor's mouth tightened. "This is sentimental invention." "It is documented invention," Thomas replied. "You knew when the East Tower repairs uncovered the locket. You read the letter, you found the photograph. You understood at once what it meant." Mr. Larkin lifted his chin. "Even if such a child existed, there would be questions of legitimacy. Questions you were paid to answer honestly. I served the Vale estate for 30 years. You served its money." The words were quiet, but they altered the air. Mr. Larkin's face hardened. "Be careful," Thomas stepped closer to the table. You discovered that Isabel had borne a son before her death. You knew Mrs. Vales will left the estate to Adrian only because she believed Isabel had no living child. You also knew that if the truth came out, everything could change. Adrian looked toward his aunt. I knew nothing of this. Mrs. Vale turned to him. For the first time that night, her expression toward him softened. I believe you. The relief on Adrian's face was brief and painful, like a man allowed to breathe only after drowning in suspicion. Thomas continued. Mr. Larkin did not wish merely to hide the truth. He wished to control its discovery. He planted evidence against Adrian because Adrian was convenient, proud, nervous, tied to his father's old sin by that ring. If Adrian were blamed for disturbing the passage and concealing the letter, then any claim I made could be dismissed as the scheme of a desperate stranger aided by a guilty nephew. Mr. Larkin smiled faintly. Ingenious, entirely absurd, but ingenious. Thomas picked up the forged scrap of paper. Then explained the ink. I am not a chemist. The handwriting. I am not a graphologist. The missing papers from Isabel's box. I did not know such a box existed. Haynes spoke from the doorway. Yes, sir, you did. All eyes turned. The butler stood very straight, his old face pale in the firelight. When the roof was repaired, you asked me to bring down all items from the East Tower storage. I carried that box myself. You told me it contained only moth-eaten garments and would be returned to the family papers. Mr. Larkin's eyes narrowed. You are mistaken. No, sir, Haynes said quietly. For 30 years I was mistaken enough. A deeper silence followed. Then Reverend Pike took one step forward. I was called that night, he said. Mrs. Vale closed her eyes. I was young, afraid of scandal, afraid of men with money. They told me Isabel was fevered, irrational. They told me she had brought shame and that silence would preserve peace. I blessed a lie because it wore the clothing of propriety. His voice trembled. I have prayed for cowardice ever since. Thomas looked at him without hatred. Did she die alone? The Reverend's face crumpled. No, Clara was near the nursery passage. Haynes stood at the foot of the stairs. Miss Merrow sat outside Mrs. Vale's room, crying. None of us had courage enough to open the tower door, but she was not forgotten, not entirely. Mrs. Vale whispered, I was told she slept. Miss Merrow sobbed. You were drugged, madam. Your brother ordered the doctor to keep you quiet. Mrs. Vale looked toward Isabel's portrait, as if asking forgiveness from oil and canvas. Thomas spoke again, softer now. My mother hid my existence before they locked her away. She sent me out with a servant woman before dawn, wrapped in a blue shawl. She knew the house watched. She knew someone listened. So she left her proof where watchers would never think to look, in gloves, in hems, in children's memory, in the little places no powerful man bothers to examine. Mr. Larkin moved toward the door. Adrian blocked him. Not violently, simply firmly. The solicitor stopped. Outside, the storm sighed against the glass. Inside, the fire warmed the faces of the living and the painted face of the dead. Thomas lifted the photograph. This is not enough for revenge, he said, but it is enough for truth. Mrs. Vale rose at last. She crossed the room slowly, every step fragile until she stood before him. For a moment she did not touch him. Perhaps she feared he would vanish. Perhaps she feared forgiveness more than blame. Then she placed one trembling hand against his cheek. My daughter's eyes, she whispered. Thomas bowed his head. And in that quiet gesture, the stranger disappeared. Not because he left the room, but because he ceased to be one. He had entered Blackthorn House disguised as Elias Gray, a traveler lost in snow. He stood there now as Thomas Vale, Isabel's son, the child of a hidden sorrow, the answer to a question the house had guarded for 30 years. Above the mantel, the portrait watched, but no longer with sadness alone. In the hush of firelight and falling snow, it seemed almost as if Isabel Vale had been waiting for this very moment, when every mask had slipped, every polite lie had failed, and her child had finally come home. Chapter 10. Silence after the truth. After the truth entered Blackthorn House, no one knew where to place it. It did not rage. It did not overturn chairs or shatter windows. It simply stood among them in the drawing room, calm and undeniable, while the fire burned low and the snow continued its gentle work outside. The old house, which had watched for so many years, seemed at last to rest. Thomas Vale stood beneath his mother's portrait, no longer Elias Gray, no longer a traveler without a past. In the amber firelight, the resemblance was quiet but unmistakable. Isabel's eyes lived in his face. Her sorrow had become his patience. Her hidden letter had become his voice. Mrs. Elspeth Vale sat very still, one hand pressed over her heart. "I thought grief had finished with me," she whispered. Thomas looked at her gently. "Grief is patient, it waits for the truth to make room." Across the room, Mr. Larkin stood guarded by Adrian and Haynes, though he no longer attempted escape. His neat coat was smudged with cellar dust. His expression remained controlled, but the old dignity had thinned. Without trust around it, composure looked very much like fear. "You will ruin this family," he said. Mrs. Vale lifted her head. "No," she replied. "You mistook the family for the name may suffer. The family has already suffered enough." The words were soft yet final. Reverend Pike stepped forward, his face aged by confession. "I will give my statement in the morning," he said. "All of it, the false fever, the locked tower, the doctor, your brother, my part." Mrs. Vale closed her eyes at the mention of her brother, but she did not flinch. "And I," said Haynes, "will speak to the papers I carried down from the East Tower." Miss Marrow raised her trembling hand. "And I will speak of the blue shawl, the servant woman, the baby taken away before dawn." Thomas turned toward her. "You knew?" "Only enough to be ashamed," she said, "not enough to be brave." The room accepted this without cruelty. There had been too much cowardice in the house for any one person to own it alone. Adrian stood by the door, his father's signet ring heavy on his hand. Slowly, he removed it. No one asked him to. He crossed to the table and placed it beside the brass key, the blue velvet glove, the photograph, and the scraps of paper. The ring struck the wood with a small, dull sound. "My father protected nothing worth preserving," he said. Mrs. Vale looked at him, not with forgiveness yet, but with the first faint possibility of it. Outside, the wind softened. The storm was passing. Near midnight, they climbed to the East Tower. No one suggested it, yet one by one they understood that truth, once spoken, must be shown the room where silence had lived. Haynes carried the lamp. Thomas carried the brass key. Mrs. Vale climbed slowly, supported by Clara, while Reverend Pike followed behind, murmuring no prayers now, only breathing carefully in the cold. The tower door stood at the top of the narrow stair. Its wood was scarred near the latch. Thomas touched the marks with his fingertips. Here perhaps Isabel had knocked. Here her fear had entered the grain. Here men had mistaken a locked door for a solution. He placed the key in the lock. It turned with difficulty, then yielded. The door opened inward. The tower room was small and round, with a low ceiling and a single window facing the moor. Snowlight filtered through the glass, blue and pale. A narrow bed frame stood against the wall, stripped bare. Dust covered the floor. In one corner, a broken chair leaned beneath a sheet. Nothing cried out. Nothing accused. That was the cruelty of it. The room was peaceful. Mrs. Vale stepped inside and made a sound like a name too painful to finish. Thomas moved to the window. Beyond it, the world lay white beneath a clearing sky. The clouds had begun to part, revealing a few faint stars. The moor no longer looked threatening. It looked endless, as if dawn were already thinking of arriving. Clara knelt near the wall. "There," she whispered. At the base of the stone, almost hidden in dust, someone had scratched a line with a pin or nail. Not words, only a crescent moon. Thomas lowered himself beside it. For a moment, he could not speak. Mrs. Vale came to him, and this time it was he who reached for her hand. "She knew," he said. "She knew I would have the mark." "She remembered you," Mrs. Vale whispered. "No," Thomas said softly. "She loved me forward." The phrase filled the room with something gentler than grief. They remained there for a long while, listening to the hush that follows a storm. The house below them creaked and settled. Somewhere in the distance, a branch released its burden of snow. The sound was soft, almost tender. When they returned to the drawing room, the fire had been rebuilt. Haynes brought tea, though no one drank much. Mr. Larkin had been confined to the library until morning, with Adrian posted outside and the door locked from the hall. There was no violence in it, only consequence. Thomas stood before Isabel's portrait one last time. "I did not come for the house," he said. Mrs. Vale sat beside the fire, wrapped again in her shawl. "I know. I did not come for the estate. I know that too. I came because I feared she had vanished completely." Mrs. Vale looked up at the painted face of her daughter. "She did not vanish," she said. "We failed her, but she did not vanish." The clack in the hall struck one. This time no one flinched. Each chime moved through Blackthorn House with a different weight. Not accusation, not warning, only time continuing. Adrian approached Thomas with visible effort. "What happens now?" Thomas turned from the portrait. "In the morning the road will be cleared, statements will be made, papers examined. Mr. Larkin will answer for what he has done." "And after that?" Thomas looked around the room. The lamps, the curtains, the watching portraits, the table of evidence now transformed into keepsakes of sorrow and proof. "After that, I do not know." It was the most honest answer given all night. Mrs. Vale held out her hand. "Then stay until you do." Thomas looked at her hand for a long moment before taking it. Outside, the snow finally stopped. By dawn, Blackthorn House had changed, though nothing visible had moved. The walls were still gray stone. The windows still watched the moor. The portraits still hung in their places, but the silence was different. It no longer guarded a secret. It held a memory. The first light came pale and silver over the hills, touching the east tower, the garden, the carriage road, and the old iron gates. In the drawing room, the fire had sunk to red embers. Mrs. Vale slept in her chair. Clara rested near the piano. Adrian stood at the window, watching the morning gather itself. Thomas remained beneath his mother's portrait. For the first time since entering the house, he felt no need to ask another question. The truth had not repaired the past. It had not returned Isabel to the room, nor erased the years of fear, pride, and silence. But it had opened a door that had been locked too long. It had given the dead their name, the living their burden, and the house its peace. And in that quiet hour after the storm, Blackthorn House watched no longer like a judge. It watched like a witness whose testimony had finally been heard.